Hello guys and welcome to another video. My name is Mark, I'm an entrepreneur and property investor, and in today's video we're going to be talking about a used car crash which is currently underway. We're going to examine what's going on, why it's going on, but beyond that what we're trying to do is also understand what could be happening with some of the assets that would traditionally do well, such as housing for example, things that I invest in. And I've got about £3.5 million worth of property, about £1.7 million worth of debt, so I've got a vested interest in property prices, interest rates, all those sorts of things. So if you like this sort of transparency and you like this sort of content, please give this video a big like. It massively helps me out with the algorithm. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing. Every month we give away the subscriber dividend portfolio, which is currently sitting at about £3,500. So as soon as we get the dividend from that every month, we give it to our subscribers. That way you guys get an interactive way of seeing how passive income can be produced and how it can be paid out. And I get to give you yet another reason for subscribing to this channel. So guys, let's get into the video. Let's talk about the used car crash and what has gone on. Before we do though, I think it's important we preface it with what happened beforehand, because used cars actually became a fantastic investment over the last couple of years. They have risen by about 30%, which is completely unheard of. And there were two main reasons for this. Number one, you know that COVID happened in 2020. Now that massively reduced supply of new cars. They weren't being built, there were semiconductor issues, there was lots of reasons why vehicles were not hitting the forecourts. And demand stayed about the same, ironically. So that's going to mean that new cars go up in price. And when we get into the video, you'll see new cars did indeed go up in price. But if you look at the used car market, that trades off new cars becoming used and therefore hitting the market. So again, there was a contraction in supply and the demand stayed about the same when you look at the figures. So used car prices also increased. So that's how we preface this and go, okay, well, how do we get to where we were with used cars at record highs in terms of growth? Now, in 2022, used cars grew up to a point where it reached their peak value, and that was 17,876. That's for diesels, and petrol actually hit exactly the same peak. Now, if you look at today, the value of both of those types of vehicles is starting to fall. Now, if you look at EVs, they do slightly increase the market value as a whole because they are newer vehicles. Traditionally, there's a lot more EVs being sold over the last couple of years, so their average value is much higher. So when you look at whole of market, it does look like it's pushing up a little bit. But petrol and diesel, when you look at those two, you can see that this inflection point's taken place and used car prices are starting to come down. And there's lots of commentary in the news about used car prices coming down. And I know in America, they are expecting a big crash at the moment. And in fact, lenders are being really strict on their lending criteria over in America to make sure that people can afford these used cars, especially if they get underwater or into negative equity on vehicles. Now, the other reason that used car prices have really been inflated over the last couple of years was interest rates. You could borrow at record lows. I mean, me and my wife, we financed her Audi at 2.9%, under 3%. It's ridiculously cheap money. Now, her car is now 3 years old to us and we're looking to refinance it. We were quoted 10%, a huge increase. So interest rates played a big part in running up the value of the cars, and now they're going to play a big part in running down the value of the cars. And I think the important thing for us as investors is also to relate that to housing and stocks, because both of those things flourish when interest rates and monetary policy is nice and accommodative. Now we're looking at it all tightening up, it becoming more difficult to borrow, it becoming more expensive to borrow, prices start to dip. So let's have a look at exactly what's going on now and the reasons behind why this price crash is happening. Cost of living crisis. You guys know that inflation's been running about 10%, and that is having an impact on overall budgets. When you look at household expenditure, the two main things are normally the house and then the car. And honestly, when you have to prioritize those two things, the house probably wins out over the car. So I think when people got less disposable income, they are willing to spend less on that car. And maybe it's the second car for the family that they're willing to spend less on, or maybe it's the primary car for the family. I know myself, we're trying to keep our spending as low as possible. Instead of going out and buying a new car right now, we're going to refinance my wife's for another 3 years and hold on to it. So we are a prime example of somebody who's making do rather than going and buying new. So we're going to have an impact on the market because we're not going to be purchasing another new new or used car, which means demand is falling down. And I think this is going to be the really key thing about the cost of living crisis. And it's engineered by design. To control inflation, they want to reduce demand. They're doing it by design. So it's no surprise that demand is decreasing. Interest rates being as high as they are today, and I know the Bank of England's currently at 3%, but commercial lending on cars, even if you go into a Mercedes garage or a Volkswagen garage, it's about 10%. It's significantly more expensive than it was if you go back 3 or 4 years. So myself, as I said earlier, my wife's car 2.9%. I think my Mercedes E-Class was about 2.9, maybe 3.5%, something like that. It was significantly cheaper. And if we run the figures, you can see that on an average 15k purchase for a car, you'd be looking at £435 a month, 31, and it's now increased by about 10% to £480.98. Now, for a lot of people, that makes that incredibly unaffordable. The really interesting thing, I think, on the new car price side, and we'll come to that in a minute, was when I was looking at C-classes, which have gone up in price by about 20%. A C-class, I couldn't believe it, about 48, 50 grand, not spec'd up, just like a 220D. That is now a £650 a month car. It used to be 350, 400. They have gone up dramatically. So I think that used car prices are now feeling the pinch when it comes to consumers having less money and the cost of the ownership of the vehicles increasing. So why do we need to know this? Obviously, in history, used car prices have always come down. They've always decreased because you buy a car, it's a depreciating asset. We all know this. The point is that we were buying cars at inflated values. So now when they're depreciating, they're not just depreciating because they're becoming older, they're depreciating because the entire market's becoming less valuable. And this is also being seen in other markets, right? So if we look at, for example, housing, it's starting to dip. It's again very interest sensitive because people get mortgages on properties. It's an expensive purchase. And when they do, the available amount that they can afford is directly related to the interest rate they're going to pay. You can afford an infinite amount at 0%, right? If you've not got to pay any interest at all, and you're doing interest only, because your payment would be 0. However, if it's at 10% and it's 100 grand a house, suddenly that's 10 grand a year. You scale that up to an average property, you're looking at big increases in the cost of owning those properties. And that's why the housing market is starting to dip. Other areas you're seeing in watches, the whole market's just going on one trajectory. It's straight down. 20% off for Rolexes at the moment. Now, does that make them great investments? I don't particularly think so. I think that they just ran up the last couple of years when people had lots of this cheap money. And now you're looking at the mother of all crashes in these sort of items that people were aspiring to own, but they might not have been able to afford to do so. They were just doing it on cheap credit. And another prime example is crypto. And I'm gonna do another video on the FTX and what's happened there and how people have lost loads of money, hundreds of millions, billions. But ultimately the entire market for crypto, not something I'm involved in, because you know I like traditional assets, I like property, I like index funds. Those are my two, that's what we talk about on this channel. But we will get into crypto because it was a speculative thing. I viewed it as gambling. It's now 60 to 100% down, depending on which coin you're looking at. So this is what happens when you start tightening a market from cheap credit to much more expensive credit. And you start seeing the assets that you buy with debt starting to contract first. So guys, I hope this gives you some insight and some ability to be able to look at markets and go, okay, well, what's going on there? Certainly for me, anything that was bought with cheap credit, I think now has got the mother of all crashes coming. I think Rolexes will go down another 20%. They are still up on where they were in 2019. I think cars have got a long, long way to go. So I'm not looking to buy any more cars right now, knowing that I think that not only will you get depreciation on the asset because you own it and it gets older, but also the overall market's going to go down significantly. But let me know your opinions down in the comments. I will answer every single one. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already. Remember, we do give away the dividends, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video. Cheers, guys.